LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the December 12th edition of LiberalViewer Monday Media Mixup. Thanks for joining me. Give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you like what I'm doing today, which today will be showing the dozen best, most newsworthy clips I picked out from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for which would be really informative, educational, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all today. You can see my main topic is really two topics. It's Elon Musk and Kyrsten Sinema move more toward right-wing Republicans. And I'll talk about both Elon Musk and Kyrsten Sinema along the way with all the clips I'm showing. And by the way, if you look down in the video description, you can see short summaries of all 12 clips. Also, some of I'm going to show you a bunch of still images. As you'll see, I'm going to start with some still images because I'm going to start with Elon Musk at the beginning, where I usually put political comedy. But I guess Elon Musk thinks he is a comedian, both based on what was sort of a joke he tweeted over the weekend. I don't know if you saw this. My pronouns are prosecute Fauci. I mean, is that supposed to be a joke? Is that political comedy? And I'll get back to that in a minute. But I don't know if you all saw like the breaking news overnight that Elon Musk was actually booed off the stage. His comedy was so bad when he joined comedian Dave Chappelle on stage at his concert in San Francisco. Here's like a CNN story on that, and I put a link down in the video description to that as well. But actually, the timing of that news story is particularly fortuitous for me because that was in San Francisco last night. Tonight, Dave Chappelle is playing here in Sacramento, where I am, with Chris Rock. I bought tickets to that a long time ago, so that's one of the reasons I'm doing the show early, is so I can get it out of the way and go see Dave Chappelle and Chris Rock. I know he's controversial. Some people are at the point where they want to boycott him, just kind of like Bill Maher, and he, because of some of his transphobia and anti-Semitism. I mean, in some ways, I'm kind of glad that there was some anti-Semitism there, because coming from a Jewish background, now I don't have to worry about being a bad ally by going and seeing Dave Chappelle tonight, because he's not just transphobic, he's also anti-Semitic, and I'm ethnically Jewish or whatever, even though I'm a agnostic atheist or whatever. But anyway, I will post something in the comment section. I'll pin a comment if I go to the Dave Chappelle show tonight and it turns out he says something about the whole Elon Musk getting booed off the stage last night. So that's something special I can add to this topic. But I also wanted to talk a little bit about the real bad rightward drift of Elon Musk. Like I said, you can see it in this. My pronouns are prosecute Fauci. And I saw Scott Kelly, the astronaut, responded to that later. Here's Scott Kelly's response, which I think is very reasonable. Elon, please don't mock and promote hate toward already marginalized and at-risk violence members of the LGBTQ+ community. They are real people with real feelings. Furthermore, Dr. Fauci is a dedicated public servant whose sole motivation was saving lives. And both those things seem reasonable to me, but I guess what Elon Musk posted, it wasn't like some, joke that he was going to say, oh, I'm just being sarcastic. No, he went all in. He doubled down in response to Scott Kelly. He said, I strongly disagree. Forcing your pronouns upon others when they didn't ask and implicitly ostracizing those who don't is neither good nor kind to anyone. Although I noticed there are some pronouns in that sentence. As for Fauci, he lied to Congress and funded gain-of-function research that killed millions of people. Not awesome, in my opinion. Well, I mean, first, there's no evidence that gain-of-function research killed anyone, because you have to believe the lab leak theory, which may or may not be true if he's talking about COVID. And then it's very debatable whether Fauci even funded gain-of-function research for that second part. And as for the whole pronoun thing, I don't understand. I mean, in my ACLU work, I work with a lot of people who aren't gender binary, or that they have different pronouns, or I don't know why it's like calling someone by their correct name. it's just respectful. I don't understand why people have a problem with it, but apparently Elon Musk is like becoming a right-wing troll. That's what's so ridiculous about this whole thing. And before I get to the rest of the news summaries, which mostly focused on things like Kirsten Sinema declaring herself an independent rather than a Democrat, and I'll cover all that in like the second part here. But to finish up the Elon Musk part, I'm going to show you the Fox News Sunday news summary, because they've been all in on this Fox News coverage of the Twitter files, where Elon Musk is showing this like incredible bias against conservatives on Twitter, which there's like a lot of big holes in the way it's been reported, and I will talk about some of those holes after we watch Shannon Bream and then their reporter Alexandra Hoff give a news summary on the Elon Musk Twitter files. And this was like the main news story on Fox News Sunday, nowhere else. I mean, Elon Musk actually and the Twitter files weren't even mentioned on any of the other four corporate outlets. And I probably wouldn't have even covered it if it hadn't been for like this extra tweeting and the fact that he went on stage with Dave Chappelle, and then I'm going to see Dave Chappelle. I don't know if I'd focus so much on Elon Musk, but Fox News did. And I will talk about their news summary a little more after we watch it together over here.
Hello from Fox News in Washington. Elon Musk using his takeover of Twitter to try to expose what he says was liberal overreach. Over the past week, outside journalists working with Musk have posted batches of internal communications attempting to shed light on claims his predecessors engaged in censorship and raising questions about the powerful platform's ability to influence heated debates. In a moment, we will speak live with the NSC Strategic Communications Coordinator, John Kirby. And we'll get reaction from former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. But first, let's turn to Alexandria Hoff for the very latest. Alexandria.
Well, Shannon, more documents are set to drop today. And so far, this has been an unprecedented look at the internal debate at Twitter over content moderation, a showcase that Musk says could help restore trust among users going forward. In this pursuit, Musk passed what has become known as the Twitter files to notable writers who have then relayed their findings along with screenshots. According to reporters, the documents show how a small team of high-ranking Twitter executives assumed more and more power over content leading up to and following the 2020 election. Reporter Matt Taibbi writing that they were, quote, coming to believe sincerely that it was Twitter's responsibility to control as much as possible what people could talk about, how often, and with whom. Taibbi highlighted what he says could be the personal political bias of staff impacting policy judgment, which Taibbi says was often made on the fly. Journalist Barry Weiss saying that Twitter employees built secret blacklists seeming to consist of mostly conservatives to reduce their visibility. Now, this prompted some to recall the 2018 testimony by then Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey.
Are you censoring people?
No.
Twitter shadow banning prominent Republicans. It's bad. Is that true?
No.
Now, it's unclear whether Dorsey had considerable involvement or if he was consistently aware of ongoing decision-making over content within the company. Now, other Twitter files reporting they touched on when the company decided to censor the New York Post story on Hunter Biden's laptop. An internal note reflected on that, with one employee writing, "We blocked the NYP story, then we unblocked it," but said the opposite. And now we are in a messy situation where our policy is in shambles. Now, Taibbi also shared that Twitter executives conducted weekly meetings with federal officials, including the FBI, DHS, and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. James Baker, who served as Twitter's deputy general counsel, was fired by Musk. Baker had formerly served as general counsel for the FBI. Now, critics of the file dump have pointed out that Twitter's own terms of service state that they can, quote, limit distribution or visibility of any content on the service. And the White House says it is up to private companies to make these kinds of decisions. Shannon.
Alexandria Hoff reporting in Washington. Alexandria, thank you. Joining us now, Rear Admiral John Kirby.
And I will have a clip of John Kirby responding to a question from Shannon Bream, or a couple questions about this supposed anti-conservative bias on Twitter. Now, I have no problem with criticizing big corporate platforms' policies on content moderation, which tend to be really arbitrary. You know, my longtime fans know I've had a struggle with YouTube's content moderation policies for many years, both in terms of, I have a few videos that actually have been restricted, or a couple were even taken down, and I got appealed, and then they became like adults only for no apparent reason. And but then even more commonly, I don't get my videos monetized because of their content moderation policies. And what they're talking about in Twitter is kind of more like that. It's not the whole shadow banning. People, could still be seen by their followers. It was whether they were uplifted, they got increased visibility through the Twitter algorithms or not. And the thing is, if you've been reading the Twitter files with Matt Taibbi and Barry Weiss and Michael Schellenberger, there's a lot of holes in what they're showing. I think you even saw Alexandra Hoff there say seeming bias against conservatives, because they don't really tell you all the people who were on the list. They mention some conservatives, but they don't say how many conservatives versus how many liberals or whatever. And I mean, that's my experience with content moderation problems, is it's not politically biased. It tends to there are certain controversial things that are things that advertisers don't want to see, or that get caught by, I think there are, like I said, a lot of holes in this, even the idea that it's anti-conservative bias. And, you also saw a lot of talk about how they were talking to the FBI and the DHS and the CIA. But the thing is, that was all during the Trump administration. And Matt Taibbi, when he did his first release of the Twitter files, he mentioned that the Trump campaign, just like the Biden campaign, asked for certain things to be taken down from Twitter, but then Matt Taibbi never mentions what are the things that the Trump campaign wanted taken down. He only goes through and talks about what I was talking about last week, the Hunter Biden dick pics that got taken down, which is kind of ridiculous. And then I saw Barry Weiss was following up on what the Michael Schellenberger thing was talking about, that I've seen on Fox News, that they were talking about changing the rules so they could take down Donald Trump, or to permanently suspend Donald Trump. They keep using the term permanently suspend, which is an oxymoron because the word suspend means temporary. But they're all breathless on Fox News about how could they do this, but then that a lot of times they don't even mention they were doing this right after January 6th. And as I've shown, and I put links down in the video description, you can see on December 19th, Trump actually used Twitter to help plan January 6th. Remember this one, the "Be There Will Be Wild" tweet from December 19th, 2020. And of course, during the January 6th insurrection, he also tweeted this whole thing when he knew Mike Trump was in danger. He was egging on the hang Mike Pence crowd. So, can you really blame Twitter for trying to figure out a way to get Trump off the platform in the days after it became clear he had used it to foment an insurrection? And anyway, that was another thing I wanted to point out. I guess kudos to Alexandra Hoff at the end there for pointing out that it's part of the Twitter terms of service that they can decide how much they want to distribute or make visible the things that you post. And, if you can see it, it's not like the spam thing that happens on YouTube where you post a comment to a video and nobody can see it because they've decided it's spam or whatever. The thing that happened on Twitter, it's not that nobody could see it, it's just all your followers could still see it. It just wasn't uplifted by the algorithm. Anyway, I think I've talked about that more than enough, but I have just been totally underwhelmed by the Twitter files that they've been so breathless about on Fox News, and I just wanted to point that out. And here you can see Shannon Bream asking John Kirby, this spokesperson for the Biden administration's National Security Council, about this. John Kirby responds as if it's a hypothetical question, because the ridiculous part about it is she's asking about what happened during the Trump administration, which is all that's been revealed, that the DHS and the CIA and the FBI asked Twitter to take certain stuff down. And apparently Twitter only did it 50% of the time. But anyway, I will talk about that a little more maybe after we watch that clip together over here.
Okay, so a couple of weeks ago, you had a conversation with my colleague Martha McCallum. It was in the context of Apple and what it's doing in China. You said this: we aren't in the business of telling private companies how to execute their initiatives. But it appears from these revelations from inside of Twitter, there were regular meetings between executives there, the FBI, DHS, the DNI. Flagging tweets, expressing their concerns, it seems trying to drive certain conversations. So should or shouldn't the federal government, federal agencies, in your words, be directing private companies on how to execute their initiatives?
We aren't directing private social media companies on how to manage their content. These are decisions that they have to make as appropriate. Now, look, we obviously don't want to see, the public square polluted with hate speech and disinformation. That's not a good use of the information environment for the American people. But it's up to these social media companies to determine how they're going to manage their content, how they are going to deliver that content to their users.
But how much pushback ability do they have if the federal government, an agency like the FBI, is calling them up and saying, we don't like these specific tweets and think you should take action, and then they do, it appears?
Well, without speaking to that hypothetical situation, again, these are private companies, and they have to make these decisions based on their own policies, their own initiatives, and we respect that.
Okay, let's talk about the big news this week between Viktor Bout, the illegal arms merchant who...
And I will have a little bit of coverage of the Brittany Griner, Viktor Bout prisoner exchange. That's coming up a little later in the second half when I get to the rest of the news summaries. And, I have to say I'm not entirely unconcerned that when a government tells one of these tech platforms that they want them to take something down, especially if it's not like clearly some violation of the law or like terrorist related or whatever they're, or white supremacist, like planning for an insurrection. There are very limited categories of things where I could see the government making that request. And I think it is quite likely that the government is making way too many requests. The only thing is, like I said before I showed that clip, I haven't seen any evidence, certainly from not from the Biden administration. It's all been from Trump administration, and Fox News tries to get around it by saying, well, the FBI and the DA, the FBI is the deep state, and the FBI is having these weekly conversations. But with Twitter executives and other social media platforms. But the thing is, this is the FBI that is headed by Christopher Wray, who appointed that guy? It was Donald Trump. And this is back when Bill Barr was the Attorney General, which, the FBI is within the Department of Justice, which is run by the Attorney General. So it's like Bill Barr and Christopher Wray are the ones who are like telling Twitter to engage in all this liberal bias. I don't know. And that's the other set of big holes. And like they kept talking about how there were all these talks between government officials and Twitter to take stuff down, but they don't really say like what was it? Was it like someone giving their right-wing Republican policy opinion on tax cuts, or was it like January 6th, be there, we'll be wild, that kind of thing, or which apparently didn't even meet Twitter's incitement standards. That was one of the other like big violations. But can you really blame Twitter for wanting to get Donald Trump off the platform after he so clearly used it to help plan that insurrection and to egg on the Hang Mike Pence crowd that I was talking about earlier? Anyway, before I leave this topic, well, I have two more clips before I leave the topic. First, before I leave the Fox News coverage, I wanted to give, I gave Alexandra Hoff kudos for mentioning the Twitter terms of service that let them limit distribution and visibility. Here is Juan Williams. I think this might be what's really going on with Elon Musk. He may be like a right-wing troll and believe in all this stuff. One thing I forgot to mention about his like attack on pronouns. One thing that I've heard about Elon Musk is that he has a transgender daughter who cut off all communication with him, and that makes me think that there's like something really weird and personal going on with his like hatred of transgender pronouns or whatever. But You can let me know what you think about that in the comment section. But this is another theory about what Elon Musk is doing. If you don't buy the fact that he's becoming like a total right-wing troll, or I mean, his political opinions have always been more like conservative libertarian anyway. He was never that much of a liberal. But here is a theory that I think actually might be accurate based on what I've been seeing Elon Musk doing, from Juan Williams talking to Shannon Bream in the panel discussion on Fox News Sunday yesterday, that I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Juan, what about this? I mean, you heard these conversations in the reporting we had earlier about the FBI, about DHS, about DNI having weekly meetings and conversations, flagging things they didn't like. I mean, it's a private actor, it's a private company, but do they become a state actor when they're being directed by the federal government to do things that influence their company policy in the way that they mete it out?
Well, I think we have a national interest in so many things, but obviously I would say, just as a prime example, terrorism. You don't want terrorists controlling messaging and disinformation, but it goes beyond that into hate speech and the like. But, I think we're lost in the weeds on this one, Shannon, because I think this is not so much a political story, although, it triggers all the talk about conspiracies between big government and big corporations. I think this is an economic story in which Elon Musk paid too much for Twitter. And now he's trying to stir up controversy to develop a new audience. He's worried about the fact that with the increase of hate speech, you see advertisers fleeing. So he's busy right now trying to say to people he's the victim.
I want to make sure that we get Mark in here, too, because there's a lot to respond.
Yeah, no, I think actually based on what I've been watching Elon Musk do, like it seems like he's like sitting on Twitter most of the time. He's like trying to drum up controversy and viewership, and I almost was kind of thinking he's trying to make Twitter the Fox News social platform. That was supposedly like Rupert Murdoch and Roger Ailes' genius or business genius was that most of the media was like telling the facts and like saying things in mainstream ways that right-wing conservatives saw as liberal, and that's ridiculous. I mean, big corporations are not liberal. Even like when the people who work there give money to Democrats, it's probably more like the corporate Democrats like Kirsten Sinema that I'll get to later in the program. But the big corporations are kind of, they want to make money. That's like their main, and making money is not a liberal thing. It's not necessarily a conservative thing, but I think that Juan Williams may be right that what Elon Musk thinks he's doing is like creating a social media platform that is more welcoming to viewpoints that don't feel welcome other places, and also making it like the place to be to engage in controversies and to see like this sensational. But it's really verging into right-wing trollery, like. The first thing I showed you, my pronouns are prosecute Fauci. That's like right-wing trollery. That's not like really engaging in debate, if you ask me, but and certainly not fact-based debate. But the final clip I want to show you is I was reading along with my live viewers. I saw some of the live comments. What was it? I saw Peter Reed say that. Couldn't care less about Elon Musk. Well, first could care less, but then couldn't care less about Elon Musk. And one of the reasons this is kind of scary is Twitter has been used to spread conspiracy theories, to even plan the January 6th insurrection. And that actually is not something that has no danger, and that's why I wanted to show you. CBS News Face the Nation never mentioned Elon Musk, never mentioned Twitter, never even mentioned Kyrsten Sinema. It was like there was a lot of time spent with Jamie Dimon from Goldman Sachs. He had like a really long extended interview, and a little bit on the Brittany Griner, Viktor Bout exchange. But here is this former Trump administration national security figure who was responsible for he got fired after he said that the 2020 election was one of the most secure elections in history or whatever, Chris Krebs. And here he is talking to Margaret Brennan on CBS News' Face the Nation about why we should care about Elon Musk letting all this hate speech and white supremacy and right-wing conspiracy theories flourish on Twitter, because bad things are happening that I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
I know, Chris, you have been watching just the conversation we have with ourselves on social media and how inflamed it is. When it comes to some of these more extreme groups, it's almost sometimes, it sounds so absurd, and yet there are national security risks, as we saw in Germany this week, with this extraordinary arrest, an attempted coup in Germany by people linked to QAnon. Right. I mean, it doesn't sound real, but it is.
Well, the QAnon piece, I think it's a reminder or confirmation that QAnon is a global phenomenon that is catching on. And actually, I think in part what we're seeing now is that it's broadening and it's almost becoming mainstream. We have this attempted coup in Germany. We have January 6th and the efforts to overturn the January 2020 or the 2020 election that was Q adjacent as well. These things are catching on, and they're informing much more radical behaviors, both at a national level and as a local level. And I think in part, some of the things that we're seeing with the attacks on the electrical grid, for instance, may not be Q, but they are extremists. They are online. They're white supremacist groups that are pulling down and developing playbooks. Right. And so there are national level efforts, but there are also local level efforts. And a lot of this is just due to the broader information ecosystem and how virulent these conspiracy theories and efforts to, overcome normal civil society.
So yeah, there you see Chris Krebs giving you sort of a last button on this issue, where it's not something that's just amusing or annoying when Elon Musk opens up Twitter or any social media is opened up to right-wing conspiracy theories, and they let people go wild on the whole QAnon thing, and apparently it's led to this like coup attempt in Germany, copying what happened on January 6th here in the United States, 2021, and possibly even having some involvement with these attacks on our electrical grid, although that hasn't been shown yet. But that's just another breaking news story over the last week that is kind of disturbing and fits in with all this. And that's the last clip I'm going to show you on the Elon Musk topic. Now I'm going to get to the rest of the news summaries, most of which, well, the first few at least, or the first couple here, focus on the switch of Kyrsten Sinema from being the senator from Arizona, announced on Friday that she is going to be an independent, not a Democrat anymore. And so it kind of fits into my topic of Elon Musk, Kyrsten Sinema moving toward right-wing Republican, although I don't know if she's becoming a right-wing Republican, but she's certainly not becoming an independent to be a leftist. The last two clips I'm going to show you are one of the most conservative Democratic senators, John Tester. John Tester and Joe Manchin are John Tester's from Montana, Joe Manchin from West Virginia, and they're probably the most conservative Democratic senators. And he seems a lot more happy about Kyrsten Sinema becoming an independent than the independent senator Bernie Sanders, who is probably the most liberal of all the senators who caucuses with the Democrats. And you'll see that Bernie Sanders calls Kyrsten Sinema a corporate Democrat, which I'm definitely on Bernie Sanders' side. But those are the last two clips. First, I'm going to show you some news summaries and a couple other comments on the Kyrsten Sinema situation. But I'll start with NBC News Meet the Press, where at least Chuck Todd talks about, I didn't see a lot of coverage of Raphael Warnock getting reelected as a senator in Georgia, and Herschel Walker, like one of the worst Senate candidates in recent memory, actually being defeated. You remember, like in the first 10 minutes of my live stream last week, I predicted Raphael Warnock would win, and that didn't get a lot of coverage. I mean, I guess it's like old news now because it's like almost a week old, and there's like new news, but still, that's a big story, and it was like barely covered. You'll see like here on NBC News Meet the Press, they mention it briefly and then go into the whole Kyrsten Sinema situation that I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that longest of the news summaries together over here.
And a good Sunday morning. Well, the Democratic Party's celebration of Raphael Warnock's Georgia victory, well, that lasted less than 3 days. On Friday, Arizona Senator Kyrsten Sinema poured some cold water on that celebration. She announced she's leaving the party to become an independent. It's a move that still leaves Republicans short of any sort of working majority or even a 50-50 designation. But this does complicate the Democrats' Senate and presidential math in 2024. Sinema's move in some ways is an exclamation point on a midterm cycle that was less an endorsement of Democrats than it was a repudiation of the Trump wing of the Republican Party. And Sinema appears to be trying to go where she thinks the voters have already gone. In Arizona, Democrats trail Republicans and independents in overall party registration. And nationally, voters are starting to opt out of either of the two major parties. In fact, according to Gallup, more Americans call themselves independents than Republicans or Democrats. And that's been true now for over a decade. In fact, in 19 of the 31 states that track registration by party, one of the two major parties is actually in third place behind either an independent or unaffiliated designation. In the Senate, Sinema has rhetorically leaned into an independent streak, but on governing, she has voted with Democrats 93% of the time. Now, she did block attempts to change Senate rules on the filibuster to pass voting rights legislation or to codify abortion protections. She also blocked an increase in the corporate tax rate, and she voted against raising the minimum wage with a visible thumbs down on the Senate floor. And for those actions, Sinema was censured by the Arizona Democratic Party earlier this year. Her Democratic colleagues and Democratic leadership in Washington were quite quiet when progressives unloaded on her earlier this year.
Two Democrats voted against us. That was a terrible, terrible vote. And I think what the Arizona Democratic Party did was exactly right.
I don't believe she's really given a compelling case as to why she should be renominated as the Democratic nominee for United States Senate in Arizona. She has proven herself an obstacle to the right to vote in the United States. She is not an ally on civil rights. She is not doing what voters in Arizona sent her to do.
So from her perspective, it was probably an open question whether progressive Democrats even wanted her in the party. Already in Arizona, Sinema's potential 2024 Democratic opponents are lining up to pile on the criticism. Congressman Ruben Gallego said Sinema is once again putting her own interests ahead of getting things done for Arizonans. And Congressman Greg Stanton tweeted that her party switch is about political preservation, and he signaled his own interest in running. So what are national Democrats going to do? Will the White House help clear the field and help Sinema? Because White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre called Sinema a key partner following her decision. I mean, she provided a lot of those bipartisan victories that Biden touts. But the president himself has at times singled out Sinema negatively.
It sounds like you're putting the blame squarely on two U.S. senators for your inability to close that deal, Senator Sinema and Senator Manchin.
Look, I need 50 votes in the Senate. I have 48. Two more Democratic senators in the United States Senate. I promise you. I promise you. We're going to codify Roe.
All right, so how are some other swing and red state Democrats responding to this Sinema party switch? Joining me now is Senator Jon Tester. He is the only Democrat elected to statewide office in Montana.
Yeah, and like I said, I will have a clip of Jon Tester. That's clip 11, and then the final clip will be a very different response from Senator Bernie Sanders in clip 12. Like I said, from like one of the most conservative Democrats to one of the most liberal senators who caucuses with the Democrats, independent Bernie Sanders. But before I get to that, I mean, like I said, I think that was probably the best in-depth news coverage of that focused just on the Kyrsten Sinema switch from Democrat to Independent. It's also covered pretty well on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, where Martha Raddatz was in as the host this week. But you'll see she covers like the Kyrsten Sinema switch to Independent. She covers the war in Ukraine. She covers the Brittany Griner Viktor Bout prisoner exchange, and even like protests in Iran in a shorter news summary that I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. It was a week of political surprises here at home and a long-awaited breakthrough overseas. In Washington, Senator Kyrsten Sinema's abrupt decision to leave the Democratic Party caught Capitol Hill off guard. And while it won't rob Democrats of their majority, it will complicate their agenda and add new uncertainty. We'll discuss all of that in a moment. But first, that surprise diplomatic breakthrough between the U.S. and Russia, the prisoner swap freeing basketball star Brittany Griner, who is now receiving medical care at an Army facility in Texas. While her freedom has been celebrated across the country, President Biden is facing fierce blowback over the deal. Former Marine Paul Whelan still in a Russian prison, while a notorious Russian arms dealer, jailed for conspiring to kill Americans, is now free. For WNBA star Brittany Griner, her 10 months of detention finally over.
What's your mood? Happy? Well.
While the release itself was widely welcomed, that dramatic prisoner exchange, Griner swapped for one of the world's most notorious arms traffickers, Viktor Bout, began a wave of bipartisan criticism.
The more we engage in such exchanges, the more Americans are at risk of being scooped up and held as leverage.
Think about the exchange here. The merchant of death for a WNBA star who was picked up for marijuana. What a victory for Putin.
Add to that the American left behind, Paul Whelan, now 4 years in a Russian prison.
Having an evening to process it privately gave us a real grace to be able to, be angry at Russia.
The administration saying it had no choice.
It was either no American or one American.
But President Biden vowing the fight for Whelan's freedom will continue.
We are not giving up.
All of this happening with the backdrop of Russia's brutal assault on Ukraine. This week, the Donbas city of Bakhmut destroyed. Russians surrounding the city on 3 sides, according to retired U.S. Marine Andrew Milburn of the Mozart Group.
We are here to bring the last civilians out of a very dangerous place.
Putin admitting this week that Ukraine's infrastructure is a major target. Without water, heat, or power in the dead of winter, Kyiv's mayor says it's like the apocalypse. But Ukraine is fighting back. Drones attacking deep inside Russia itself, shown here in videos circulating online. This week, Vladimir Putin saying the war might be a long process, asking for hundreds more ballistic missiles from Iran, where that nation's months of protests have prompted brutal crackdowns. On Thursday, a sickening escalation. Iran's government announced the execution by hanging of Mohsen Shikari, a 23-year-old Iranian convicted of blocking a street and attacking a member of the militia during a protest. Hundreds more are facing charges that carry the death penalty. And joining me now is John Kirby, the National Security Council Coordinator for Strategic.
And I don't have an ABC John Kirby clip. I already showed you the Fox News John Kirby clip where he talked about the whole Fox News obsession with the Twitter files. But I don't know if you think that news summary from ABC is better than one from NBC. NBC, like, totally focused on the Kyrsten Sinema switch to be an independent, which, honestly, if you saw that NBC news summary, isn't that big a deal in terms of what's going on in the Senate, because she's caucusing with the Democrats. She is getting committee assignments from Chuck Schumer, so they still basically, other than changing her designation to try to avoid a primary challenge from the Democrats in Arizona in 2024, She isn't really changing the way she acts in the Senate, and it doesn't really change the 51-49 balance, and that wasn't covered very well there, and I think it was covered pretty well on NBC, although ABC also gave you a bunch of other stories, the protests in Iran, the war in Ukraine, the Brittany Griner, Viktor Bout prisoner exchange, all those. I don't know, do you think that makes the ABC News This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary better than the one from NBC? And also, to ABC's credit, it's not like they didn't cover the Kyrsten Sinema switch earlier, although I think that they covered it to make it look like more of a blow to Democrats than it really is. I was just saying how it doesn't really change much in the Senate. She's still caucusing with the Democrats. She's still getting committee assignments from Chuck Schumer. But for some reason, this ABC, to their credit, like I said, did do a longer news story on the Kyrsten Sinema switch later in the program, where Martha Raddatz talks to their senior political analyst, or whatever his title is, Rick Klein. But he seemed to make it seem like more of a blow to Democrats than it really was. I mean, he doesn't really mention the fact that she's still caucusing with the Democrats, although the thing is, even when she was a Democrat, she didn't really show up to caucus very much from the other coverage I've seen. But at least she voted with the Democrats like 93% of the time, and she voted for all the judges, which is even more important. But here I think Rick Klein overhypes the danger to Democrats, and even by the end of the story, you'll hear him say it makes their Senate majority even more precarious, which we'll see in 2 years in 2024. Well, of course, yeah, things are bad for Democrats in 2024 because they have a lot more seats up, including John Tester in Montana, which is a very Republican state, and Joe Manchin in West Virginia, which is a very Republican state, which Rick Klein talks about. But I will talk about that a little more after we watch this supplementary ABC news and analysis on the Kyrsten Sinema switch from yesterday together over here.
Today's announcement is a reflection of my values, and I think the values of most Arizonans who are tired of a political system that pulls people to the edges and really doesn't reflect who we are as a people. My stand today is about joining the many Americans who don't believe that any political party fits them perfectly.
Arizona Senator Kyrsten Sinema shocked Washington and her home state with that surprise announcement Friday that she will leave the Democratic Party and become an independent for the final 2 years of her term. So what's the bottom line, and how will it affect the balance of power? Our political director, Rick Klein, is here to walk us through the fallout this morning. And Rick, Senate Democrats went to great lengths Friday to downplay the impact of her party switch on the Senate. After all, they say there are already some independents serving in the Senate, but this really isn't the same.
Yeah, Martha, Democrats are downplaying this, but it is a gut punch with real implications for how they govern and how they campaign, particularly in the wake of this last election cycle, including the race in Georgia. The upshot of this election cycle, Democrats actually were the only party to pick up a seat over in Pennsylvania. That left them with a 51-49 majority. The two current independents, Senator Sanders and Senator King, they're essentially Democrats. They caucus with the Democrats. Democrats won't run another candidate against them. Senator Sanders is even a member of Democratic leadership. Senator Sinema, though, she is choosing a much different path. So this is now what we're looking at. 50-49 with Senator Sinema, the one independent. That means that Democrats are still technically in control. Senator Sinema says she's still going to keep her committee assignments, courtesy of Democrats. But that is the slimmest of margins. There is no wiggle room whatsoever. And it empowers someone like Senator Manchin from West Virginia to be just as influential over any legislation, anything that's happening in the Senate, as he was over the last couple of years.
Exactly. And Rick, Democrats in Arizona are accusing Sinema of putting her political career before her constituents with this announcement. Are they right? And does this make her more vulnerable if she runs for re-election?
Yeah, Martha, these are the states that are up in the next election cycle, Arizona among them. Senator Sinema has not said whether she's running for re-election, but she doesn't have to worry about a primary anymore. The flip side of that, though, is that the Democrats are already talking about taking her on. A progressive Congressman, Ruben Gallego, he's already raising money to potentially challenge her. The state Democratic Party is now at war with her. They say that she's beholden to corporations and special interests. That could set up a messy three-way race in Arizona that could easily cost Senate Democrats control of that seat. And it comes in the context of an absolutely brutal map. If you look at the states that are up, 21 out of the 34 are currently held by Democrats. That includes some very red at the presidential level states like Montana, as well as Ohio. And it also includes, as we talked about, Arizona and West Virginia. Now, like Senator Sinema, Senator Manchin hasn't said whether he's running for re-election or not, but that is a state that Donald Trump carried by almost 40 points last time around. So look, the upshot of all of this is the Democrats are in control of the Senate, but it is a precarious majority that becomes even dicier as we get closer to the next set of elections.
Precarious indeed. Thanks so much, Rick. The other major political news this week came.
Precarious that gets even dicier as we get closer to the next election. Well, dicier after the next election, because there are, I think, like 23 Democratic seats up, and like a third of the seats are up in the Senate every 2 years, and there are like 23 seats that the Democrats have to defend, including Joe Manchin. You saw Rick Klein talk about. He didn't mention John Tester in Montana, but that's another heavily Republican state that John Tester looks like he might run again and could win, and that, like I said, you can make your own determination after we show John Tester talking in clip 11. But I don't know if you agree with me. I think that Rick Klein overhyped the impact on Democrats in the Senate of Kyrsten Sinema calling herself an independent, but still getting committee assignments from the Democratic caucus, so still caucusing with the Democrats, having a good relationship with Chuck Schumer. And you heard in the previous news stories how the White House is calling her like an important partner, so they're still possibly, allying with her. And it's not a done deal that there's going to be a Democrat running against her in Arizona. That might happen. Time will tell, as the pundits always say. But I'm going to show you 3 newsmaker clips on that. First, an extended clip of Kyrsten Sinema talking to Jake Tapper about why she made this decision. And Jake Tapper actually doing a pretty bad job of following up and cross-examining her on it. And then, like I said, Senator John Tester from Montana saying nice things about Kyrsten Sinema because he's so conservative as a Democrat. And then Bernie Sanders, maybe the most liberal senator in the Senate, calling her basically a corporate shill, which, in my opinion, is what she has behaved as she's been a senator. But before I get to that, I want to show the last 2 news summaries, and they're both really brief. First one's a little over a minute, the other one's like 40 seconds. And this is CNN and CBS, neither of which talked about Kyrsten Sinema. They both concentrated on the Brittany Griner, Viktor Bout prisoner exchange, which for various different reasons. Here's CNN State of the Union talking about that, and then I'll talk about it a little more with you after we watch that brief clip together over here.
Hello, I'm Dana Bash in Washington, where the state of our union is thankful. Thankful that an American detained in a Russian penal colony is finally home. You're looking at new pictures of Brittany Griner, the WNBA superstar who touched down on American soil early Friday morning. She reunited with her wife, Sherelle, and was taken immediately for a medical evaluation. President Biden celebrated her return and now faces questions about his decision to trade convicted Russian arms dealer Viktor Bout in exchange for the WNBA star. And the American left behind in Russia, Paul Whelan, who has been held prisoner there for nearly 4 years. My guest now is working to free Whelan and dozens of Americans held hostage in other foreign nations, and he has a pretty good track record. Special presidential envoy, I should say, for hostage affairs, Roger Carstens, helped secure Griner's release and was there to greet her and bring her home. Thank you so much for joining me this morning.
And I think State of the Union may have focused on that story because they had Roger Carstens there, who was on a couple of the programs. I'm not going to show the clip, but he said like very nice things about Brittany Griner, and also, I don't know what you think about that story and the exchange for the arms dealer Viktor Bout, but that was also the only real news that was talked about in the CBS News Face the Nation news summary, where, I actually extended this a little so that I could let Margaret Brennan, say something new, like how the intelligence services of the United States and Russia had talked to each other, and that's what caused this prisoner exchange to happen, because, basically, otherwise, the Face of the Nation news summary was so brief, it was just like, midterms are over, that's the news. But there was a little more that I'll talk about a little more after we watch together over here.
Good morning, and welcome to Face the Nation. With an historic midterm election finally over, Congress is set to take on unfinished business, including finalizing the investigation into the attack on the U.S. Capitol. But we want to begin with the latest on Russia. Joining me now is the chair of the House Intelligence Committee. That's Congressman Adam Schiff, who also serves on that select committee investigating the January 6th attack. It's good to have you here in person.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
Chairman Schiff, Vladimir Putin said on Friday that it was the FSB, Russian intelligence, and the CIA that had contact to negotiate this prisoner swap of Brittany Griner for Viktor Bout, the arms dealer.
So, yeah, like I said, I extended that so that, it was the intelligence services talk to each other. And then she asked Adam Schiff to respond to that. And by the way, if you go down into the video description to the links under sources, the link for Face the Nation goes to the Face the Nation YouTube channel, where the entire program is split into segments, including that one with the opening, and then the entire interview with Adam Schiff. You can watch it if you want to see how he responds to that, or also talks about the January 6th committee giving criminal referrals. That's in that same interview. But that was the last of the news summaries, so now I just have 3 newsmaker interviews, clips from 3 newsmaker interviews coming up. First, CNN's State of the Union had this whole announcement from Kirsten Sinema that she was becoming an independent and no longer a Democrat, was first broken in an interview with Jake Tapper on CNN, which CNN has been doling out in small quantities. And here's Dana Bash on CNN's State of the Union giving an introduction about that, and then showing a never before seen clip of that interview where Kyrsten Sinema kind of talks about why she's doing it, but Jake Tapper, I think, does a really bad job of cross-examining her on it, which I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Back to State of the Union, Senate Democrats kicked off their week with a big victory when Senator Raphael Warnock won his re-election in Georgia. But the week ended with a new wrinkle when Senator Kyrsten Sinema announced that she's leaving the Democratic Party to become an independent. Take a listen to the senator explaining more about her decision in a brand new clip from her interview with my co-host, Jake Tapper.
When you look at your voting record and the issues that are important to you as spelled out on your website, most of them are traditional Democratic issues, capital D, expanding health care access, abortion rights, LGBTQ rights, path for dreamers, and on, environmentalism, green energy. That sounds like a Democrat to me, no?
Well, I know this is really hard for lots of folks, especially in DC. But what's important to me is to not be tethered by the partisanship that dominates politics today. And I think Americans are tired of it. I think Arizonans are tired of it. What I'm interested in is working on all those issues that you just mentioned that I care deeply about and that I believe my constituents care deeply about. But I want to work on them in a way that is productive, that is free from the trappings of the pull of the political system. You know, the national political parties have pulled our politics farther to the edges than I've ever seen. I want to remove some of that, kind of that poison from our politics. I want to get back to actually just working on the issues, working together to try and solve these challenges.
And one of the big complaints I hear from conservatives, from Republicans, is Democrats just don't take border security seriously. They just don't. Do you agree with that sentiment? And do you think there is an actual path forward there? Democrats are still going to have the majority in the next Senate. You can still get this on the floor of the Senate if you want.
Well, as a native Arizonan who was born and raised near the southern border, I can tell you unequivocally that the federal government has failed its duty in the last 40 years.
Not just Democrats.
It's just everyone. The federal government has failed here. And places like Arizona, front lines of this crisis, have been paying the price every single day since then. So for us, this isn't just a talking point of Team A versus Team B. This is our life every day. The reality is that when folks say, you know, we've got to just provide a legal path to citizenship for dreamers, which I support wholeheartedly, these kids are Americans in all but name. So when folks say we've got to do that, I agree. And when folks say we've got to secure the border, of course I agree. You know, my state is suffering from the failure to do so for 40 years. So this is a perfect example of why I'm so frustrated with partisanship that has gripped our nation, and the parties are pulling folks away. It's not either or, it's and. Both of those concerns are real and valid, and we as a government have a duty to solve both of those concerns.
You're up for re-election in 2024. This move means, I suppose, that you're not going to be running in the Democratic primary for the Senate seat?
Well, I know this will probably be disappointing to folks, but I'm actually not even thinking about electoral politics or talking about that at all right now.
But doesn't this increase the likelihood that your run for re-election will be tougher because you will not only have a Republican opponent, you may even have a Democratic opponent?
You know, I don't make decisions based on what the easy road or the tough road is. I have always tried to make decisions based on what I think is right. And for me, it's very important that we have a discussion at home in Arizona and here in the nation's capital about reducing the partisanship and just focus on solving the challenges that we face in America. The challenges we face are great. They're significant. We cannot solve them by using partisan attacks. We cannot solve them through a partisan lens. And I want to be a part of having that discussion and showing that there is a different way.
Would you ever run for president?
No.
Yeah, and that was the follow-up from Jake Tapper. Jake Tapper's cross-examination was really bad there. He was talking about how, you know, you made things harder for yourself because you're running as an independent instead of as a Democrat, and you might face a Democratic challenger, without ever pointing out the fact that you saw from the previous news coverage that Kirsten Sinema probably couldn't have won the Democratic primary because she has acted so often as like a corporate shill. And, you know, Jake Tapper's first question was good. She claims to support all these Democratic, and she voted with the Democrats a lot of the time, and she claims to support all these issues that Democrats support. So why is she becoming an independent? Because she also thwarted a lot of goals of the Democrats. She stopped. One of the things that I found most annoying about her is she was basically a spokesperson for big corporations and the rich, the whole carried interest loophole, you know, where hedge fund managers don't have to declare the money they make as income, and they get to declare it as capital gains where they pay a lot lower taxes. And it's totally bogus, and it makes the ultra rich pay lower tax rates than their secretaries and janitors. And that's something that Kyrsten Sinema put a lot of effort into making sure that stayed as something that creates the wealth gap in America and makes it even worse. But anyway, I wanted to show you that clip of Kyrsten Sinema in her own words. Jake Tapper not really doing a good job cross-examining her. You can let me know what you think in the comment section. But now I'm going to show you, as I promised, the last two newsmaker clips. First, John Tester on NBC News' Meet the Press, saying a lot of nice things about Kyrsten Sinema because he's one of the most conservative Democrats, which I think supports the premise of the title of my video, that Kyrsten Sinema is moving to the right. She's much closer to John Tester than Bernie Sanders. And if anyone knows the biography of Kyrsten Sinema, she was like in the Green Party in Arizona. I don't know what happened to her. I don't know what her problem is, but you can let me know if you know in the comment section. And here's John Tester showing, and I had to like edit this down because Chuck Todd did not do a good job in cross-examination. He let John Tester go off into, like, tell me what you think about the filibuster. I edited a lot of that out. And then this whole, what are your plans in Montana? And I kept the most important parts. And also, you can see John Tester explain why, even though he is one of the most conservative Democrats, why it's so important to him to not be an independent, but to be a Democrat. And I wish Kyrsten Sinema had some of those values, but Kyrsten Sinema is definitely closer to John Tester than the final clip I'll show you of Bernie Sanders, where Bernie Sanders really lays into her. I wish other Democrats, even the conservative ones like John Tester, would be willing to do that, but not really over in this clip that I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Is Senator John Tester. He is the only Democrat elected to statewide office in Montana. In 2020, Donald Trump carried Montana by more than 16 points. In 2012, the last election, when Tester was on the ballot with the presidential campaign, Tester was able to run ahead of Barack Obama by 7 percentage points. Senator John Tester, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Good to be with you, Chuck. Thank you.
All right, so I guess on a scale of 1 to 10, to complete shock, or this is just another day at the office, where do you put the Sinema changing her party affiliation to independent?
Look, I was surprised she made the change, but functionally, I don't think that change is a thing. I think we're going to continue doing the same thing that we were doing, whether she's an independent or part of the Democratic caucus, because she's going to continue to caucus with the Democrats. So we'll still have the committee structures that we've had before, as far as having one more Democrat. And functionally, I don't think it changes a thing. And that's a good thing. So we look forward to working. I look forward to working with her, as I have in the past, to try to get good things done for the country.
I want to talk about that relationship. Look, Arizona Democrats are not happy with her at all. I want to just run down some of the critiques. The state party chair said she answers to corporations and billionaires, not Arizonans. The executive mayor of Lucha, a local organization down there, called it another unfortunate, selfish act. You have a progressive political consultant based in Phoenix, Ian Danley, saying everything she's done has been in service of Kyrsten Sinema. Is that your experience working with her?
No, look, I had a good experience working with Kirsten on a number of different topics, but especially the bipartisan infrastructure package that we put together with 10 folks, 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, of which I was one of the Democrats, and she was too. We worked hard together, we argued, and we fought, and we came up with a pretty darn good bill. And I think that's the process, Chuck. You know that. Your enemy one day is your friend tomorrow, and vice versa. And it's about keeping relationships in Washington, D.C. if you're going to get things done. And I think think that Kyrsten Sinema knows that, and I think whether she's a Democrat or she's a Republican, that really doesn't matter. The label doesn't matter. What matters is you got to have somebody in Washington, D.C. that wants to get things done and move things forward. We certainly have enough obstructionists in Washington, D.C. So, look, I think she's got a pretty good track record of getting things done. Has she been perfect on everything from my perspective? No, but I haven't been perfect from her perspective either. So I think you just work together, you do things, and move the country forward. And I think that's what we did last Congress.
Let me ask you this, though. You know, you and her basically share the same position on the filibuster. Yet she was vilified for it. You have not. Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, I was for going back to the days of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington filibuster, where people talked and could hold the floor for weeks on end if they want, but in the end it was a simple majority vote after the people got done with a talking filibuster. And so I think it does still keep minority rights, which is what the filibuster is about.
You know, you actually vote less with Joe Biden than Kyrsten Sinema does. You're comfortable being a Democrat in Montana. Why is that?
Look, I'm also a farmer, and I can tell you that we would not have the farm today if it was not for democratic politics of FDR. And my grandfather and grandmother talked to us about that. My folks talked to me about that. And I will tell you that I am forever grateful for that, because I'm blessed to be a farmer. I love agriculture, and I wouldn't be one without the Democrats.
Well, I say that because, you know, I'm sure you're going to get a lot of questions in Montana. Hey, why don't you leave the party? Before I move on to this topic, do you want to see Senator Sinema reelected?
Look, that's a choice for the Arizona voters, number one. And number two, I certainly have no bones to pick with Kyrsten Sinema. I think she's served this country well. Mm-hmm. And look, it will be a choice. You know, elections are about choices, right. And the Arizona people are going to have a choice, whether it's a Democrat, an independent, or a Republican that represents them in the United States Senate, along with Senator Kelly, and they'll make that call based on probably the same kind of information they will in any state in the union.
Yeah. Do you think Democratic leadership ought to give her some deference, the way they give Angus King deference?
I mean, sure. I think they ought to try to treat everybody equally, for sure. And I don't know that Angus King gets deference.
Well, they don't field a Democrat. They don't fund a Democratic candidate out there.
Does a really good job.
Yeah, they don't fund a official Democrat in Maine.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, that may be the case. Mm-hmm. I'm not aware of that, but.
That's kind of weird that Jon Tester doesn't know whether the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee fields an opponent in Maine to Angus King or an opponent to Bernie Sanders in Vermont, which they don't. That's the thing, that because they are strong members of the Democratic caucus. I mean, Bernie Sanders is even in the leadership. Even though they call themselves independents, the Democrats don't spend money on fielding an opponent to them in their states. And I cut out some stuff where Jon Tester talked about his position on the filibuster, and where he talked about why he may or may not run again in Montana. But I think I kept in that clip you just saw all the things Jon Tester said about Kyrsten Sinema and how he liked her so much. And I think that supports the claim in the title of my video that Kyrsten Sinema is moving towards the right-wing Republicans, and certainly much closer to Jon Tester, and farther away from one of maybe the most liberal senator in the Senate, independent Bernie Sanders, Democratic socialist. My longtime viewers may remember that in the primaries in 2016 and the primaries in 2020, I voted for Bernie Sanders. I voted for Bernie Sanders over Hillary Clinton in 2016 in California, and Bernie Sanders over Joe Biden in 2020. But you shouldn't be surprised that I am much more in line with what Bernie Sanders says about Kyrsten Sinema versus what you just saw from very conservative Democratic Senator Jon Tester. But, I mean, to Jon Tester's credit, he did explain why he is still a Democrat, you know, because of like FDR's position in the New Deal that kept his family as farmers in Montana, and he'll always be grateful for what happened in like the 1930s and the 1940s. And I mean, that is, I mean, at least it is a, you know, a narrative that makes sense. Kyrsten Sinema like never explains her positions, and all you can do is watch what she does, and it seems like she's an apologist for like the big corporations and the rich, like the carried interest loophole I was talking about before. And that's why I am much more in line with Bernie Sanders' sentiments about Kyrsten Sinema not being progressive, being basically a corporate shill who should not be supported. But I will talk about that a little more after we watch that final newsmaker clip together over here.
Senator, first, you are an independent. She is now the third official independent of the U.S. Senate, joining you and Angus King of Maine. What do you think of her decision, and also what you just heard in her interview with Jake?
I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on Senator Sinema. She has her reasons. Donna, I happen to suspect that it's probably a lot to do with politics back in Arizona. I think the Democrats there are not all that enthusiastic about somebody who helps sabotage some of the most important legislation that protects the interests of working families and voting rights and so forth. So I think it really has to do with her political aspirations for the future in Arizona. But for us, I think nothing much has changed in terms of the functioning of the U.S. Senate. The good news is that we now have 51 votes. We'll have a majority on committees. It means that we can go forward and start protecting the interests of working families and deal with the reality that we are increasingly living in an oligarchy where the billionaire class and large corporations control almost every aspect of our country. So I would hope very much that with this new majority, Democrats will sit down and start fighting for the needs of ordinary Americans.
So I want to talk about some of those issues in a second. But first, you were a very important figure on the campaign trail for progressives ahead of the midterms, as you normally are. I'm sure you're going to be campaigning for candidates in 2024. The outgoing Arizona Democratic Party official, one of them says that he expects Democrats will run their own candidate against her. Is that a good idea? Would you support a Democratic opponent against Senator Sinema?
I support progressive candidates all over this country, people who have the guts to take on powerful special interests. I don't know what's going to be happening in Arizona. We'll see who they nominate, but certainly that's something I will take a hard look at.
Does she have the guts to take on powerful special interests?
No, she doesn't. She is a corporate Democrat who has, in fact, along with Senator Manchin, sabotaged enormously important legislation.
I want to talk about a major deadline to fund.
And then they talk about the government shutdown. And as usual, if you go down to the links in the video description under sources, you can see all the 5 corporate outlet shows. And like I said before I showed that clip, I'm much more in line with what Bernie Sanders said about Kyrsten Sinema than any of the other stuff you saw, like corporate Democrat. And I mean, I am a registered Democrat, but I am much more in line with independent Bernie Sanders than corporate Democrats like Kyrsten Sinema, who are, they're corporate Democrats because they're more in line with the big corporations and the rich. And I talked about that extensively, but I want to finish the program because I have to go off to that Dave Chappelle Chris Rock concert tonight. And like I said, if Dave Chappelle says anything about this whole Elon Musk controversy, I will post a comment and in the recorded version of the show, and I'll pin it. So come back and check the video to see if that happened. I promised to do that, and I appreciate all of you who showed up for this live stream. I will be continuing this live stream for the next couple years through the 2024 elections. It looks like I'll be talking about that more in the last couple videos of 2022 as to how I will plan to go through 2024. I hope you appreciate all the time and effort I put into creating this live stream, watching all the big 5 corporate outlets and doing the rest of the research I had to do to put this stream together, cutting the clips and doing the broadcasting. That's like 10 or 15 hours of work that I appreciate support from my patrons on Patreon and the people who give me one-time PayPal contributions. That's like the first 2 links under the video description, or you can also click that join button and become a YouTube member. There are a lot of different ways to support the live stream financially. I guess we'll see if this live stream gets monetized once it's done. A lot of times they get demonetized and then remonetized, but anyway, like I said, I will post a comment in the recorded version of the show if Dave Chappelle says anything about Elon Musk tonight at the show in Sacramento I'm attending. And until then, or until next Monday when I do my next live stream, or I have some other reason to upload a video, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.